Well, welcome.
Yes, and welcome to you. We're welcoming all of you.
Welcome, everybody.
Welcoming you back.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to be out, and it's wonderful to be back. And you all did well, and I'm proud of you, and it's nice to be back.
Well, it's so good to be back with you. Normal's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's so good. You know, there's that song that they're trying not to play, Baby, It's Cold Outside, but let me tell you, it's cold. You know, where is Al Gore when you need him? I mean, for heaven's sakes, we're supposed to have global warming. The poles are supposed to melt, and Greenland is melting, and the oceans are rising because of the warming. What is going on? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. There's some sunspots that are not active like they have been, and we're getting very cold. And Arctic air is freezing the Midwest. They say in Chicago it might be the coldest temperature, not only in decades, maybe forever. Chicago set a record. Minneapolis, you know, Great Falls, Minnesota, new record. It's so, the wind chill is beyond belief, and it's going to get worse.
And some of it's not wind chill, it's actual temperature.
Actual temperature, exactly.
It's crazy. Well, this polar vortex is going to hover over the country for several days. And to storm this bringing ice and snow heads toward the east and parts of the south. Caitlin Burke has more.
It's being described as the coldest air in generations. What that means is life-threatening low temperatures expected to shatter records and plunge the Midwest into a deep freeze.
It's all because of the polar vortex, a large pocket of very cold air, typically the coldest air in the northern hemisphere, which sits over the polar region during the winter season. Well, that air has found its way to the United States.
This is just not, oh, it's January, it's getting cold. There were a bunch of things lining up in the preseason, and they've all come together for this extreme event that's going to be occurring over the next 4 or 5 days.
The extreme temperatures started in the upper Midwest on Sunday, with temperatures plummeting well below zero. But believe it or not, the worst is yet to come. Wind chills of 50 to even 60 below zero are expected across the Midwest this week, causing government officials to declare states of emergency from Wisconsin all the way down to Alabama.
By the way, I've dubbed this Cold-mageddon because if it can get to 25 below in Chicago, that's far beyond this polar vortex stuff.
One of the most dangerous aspects of this deep freeze is how long it will stick around. Parts of the Midwest could be experiencing those sub-zero temperatures for 48 to 72 hours. And for some areas, it's coming on the heels of a snowstorm, making for dangerous travel conditions.
It's rough, slippery, and it's nasty. I wouldn't want to drive in this type of weather at all.
For reference, by Wednesday, Chicago could be colder than Mount Everest, Antarctica, and even Siberia.
I actually tweeted back on January 10th, there's going to be a big war between people saying it's the ice age coming because of no sunspots, and the other guys saying, well, it's CO2. You know what it is? It's nature. Of course it's nature. How did it happen before? The same way it's happening again.
It's not only the Midwest being affected by the polar vortex. In the South, temperatures are way less severe, but still much colder than residents in those areas are used to, and could be accompanied by ice and snow. In Atlanta, where the Super Bowl is happening Sunday, flights have been canceled, schools are already being canceled, and emergency preparations are underway. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Thanks, Caitlin. You know, one of the things, they put salt out on the roads, but now the salt is not affecting because it is so cold that it's not doing any good. And so you have to have something that will melt below these freezing temperatures, and they don't have it. So the ice is going to be ungodly. And, you know, if you have snow on top of this and any of it melts and then it freezes on top, it can be weeks before they get this stuff out. So we're talking about something serious. But, you know, I've been harping on this program for months and actually years, the so-called budget deficit that everybody ignores. Well, we're running up deficits in our fiscal spending that are approaching $1 trillion a year, and America is borrowing more money to finance these deficits. Ephraim Graham has more on that story that may be the most tragic thing facing the world as they're facing trillions of dollars in debt they can't pay off. Here's Ephraim.
Pat, a new report is out from the Congressional Budget Office. It predicts the U.S. deficit is set to hit $897 billion this year. That's up $118 billion over last year. The Treasury is borrowing $1 trillion to make the payments. The CBO report also predicts a slowing economy with a growth rate at 2.3%. That's down 3.1% last year. President Trump's top economic advisor disagrees with the report. He says the CBO underestimates the strength of the U.S. economy and its ability to shrink the deficit.
We have a fundamental disagreement with that agency regarding the growth outlook. In the first 2 years of the Trump administration, our view has essentially been correct, and their pessimistic view has essentially not been correct.
Larry Kudlow also said the government shutdown has not had a significant impact on the economy overall. The Trump administration is blocking all U.S. funds to Venezuela's national oil company. It is the latest move in the U.S. campaign to force Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro from power. The U.S. and other nations are backing interim President Juan Guaido, who was installed by Venezuela's National Assembly. They claim Maduro stole the most recent election. Pat?
You remember we were having a discussion with one of our reporters some years ago, and we were talking about the excesses of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, where he had said, you know, they may be trying to assassinate me. And I said, well, we ought to go ahead and do it. And oh, it was shock waves all over the world. Aren't you horrible? Isn't that shocking? Isn't that terrible that you would say such a thing as that? Well, the truth was, ladies and gentlemen, I say it again, I was right because I saw what was happening. You have a socialist dictator who took power at the point of a gun. He, in turn, he assassinated the people upline from him and seized power. And he was instituting a socialist dictatorship. The chickens have come home to roost, if I can use that cliched expression. And Venezuela, they've got inflation running over 1,000,000%. It's unbelievable. And those people are suffering so much down there. And this Maduro is a former, what was he, a bus driver or something. He doesn't know what he's doing. And the only thing that's going on right now is everybody is against him except the army. And my advice would be there must be some strategic placement of money in the hands of some of those generals to say, look, guys, you're picking the wrong horse, and wouldn't you like to have a Swiss bank account tax-free to switch sides? And somebody, or the Brazilians or the Peruvians or somebody, has got to offer those generals some incentive to switch from Maduro. But that the suffering of those people in Venezuela just absolutely breaks your heart. One of the wealthiest countries in the world with one of the highest incidents of petroleum. And now we're shutting off the National Petroleum Company. We're putting an embargo on that. They have embargoed the seizing of gold assets from around the world. Other countries are saying, Maduro, you can't access them. So the government is essentially broke. But what's got to be done is something to tell those generals, let's switch sides. And John Bolton was saying, well, maybe we put 5,000 American troops down in Colombia to help bolster it. But the one thing, we don't want to get involved if we possibly can, because they'll say it's the Yankee invasion and they're trying to dominate it. It needs to be the OAS and the South and Central American governments that make the deal. But they've turned against Maduro, and it's just a question of time. But the people in Venezuela are still suffering, and my heart, as yours does, bleeds for those wonderful people. So pray for them, pray for a speedy resolution. But my advice would be, whatever you can do, talk to those generals quietly, and if you have to offer them some incentive financially, make it for them so that they'll be able to leave quietly and have a nice retirement, but they can withdraw their support for that president. And once that's withdrawn, he will collapse like a balloon with the air out of it. Ephraim.
Pat, President Trump will give his State of the Union address on February 5th. That is 1 week from today. He was supposed to give this speech in the House of Representatives tonight, but it was canceled due to the partial government shutdown. The president agreed to temporarily reopen the government, but he says he is ready to shut it down again if he doesn't get funding for a border wall. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said it is up to Democrats if they want to avoid another shutdown.
The president doesn't want to go through another shutdown. That's not the goal. The goal is border security and protecting the American people. Ideally, Democrats would take these next 3 weeks to negotiate in good faith, as they've indicated that they would, and come up with a deal that makes sense, that actually fixes the problem, so we don't have to go through that process.
Pat, the clock is ticking. They've got just 3 weeks to make a deal.
Well, I don't join some of the extremists on the right who are screaming that Trump is a sellout. I think he's the president. He's got to do what he has to do. And yeah, but at the same time, that shutdown cost, get this, $11 billion. That's how much that shutdown cost. We can't afford that anymore. We can't have another one. We just can't do it. And so something's got to be done. They think there may be some Democrats that are willing to bend a little bit, and all they need is a few $1 billion, and they can make that deal work. But something's got to be done, and but I mean, no way, no how can there be a shutdown of the United States government again. The president can't possibly do it. If he does, I mean, his political feature is cooked. But whatever you do, don't listen to the Ann Coulters of this world and those who are on the extreme far right. And people in your own administration, don't listen to Stephen Miller, et cetera. Don't listen to them. And get your advice from people who are more level-headed about how you handle the government. Well, CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, is joining us now. David, the clock's ticking. What do you think the president's next move is going to be?
Well, he's hoping, Pat, that they're going to come to some sort of deal in the next couple weeks here. I say we're talking about a 17-member bipartisan group of House Democrats and also Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans and House Republicans. But look, I don't think there's much chance that they're going to get exactly what the president wants. So the question then becomes, what do they come up with, and will it be enough for the president to take? And I have a feeling, Pat, the way this is going, and I've been in Washington, you know, for a decent amount of time, maybe too long, Pat. Look, he's not getting his $5.7 billion, and if he is getting anywhere near that, it sure isn't for a wall. The question then becomes, what is the package? My sense of it is that there's going to be some money for fencing, barriers, steel slats, Lego pieces, whatever you want to call it. But the point simply is that there'll be some money there. But it won't be, and here's the key, Pat. Donald Trump has wanted wall prototypes. You know, all of these things that he's debuting at the San Diego border. Says, look at these beautiful walls. Not going to be any of that. I think what it's going to end up being is some existing fencing that the government has already approved back in the day of the Secure Fence Act. And I think if that's the case, then that'll be part of the bargain. And also, I don't think it's going to be 5.7. It might be $1 million, $2 million. And the question is that going to be enough for the president to take?
Well, this whole idea of him declaring a national emergency and taking money away from the Defense Department, what do you think on that one?
Well, it's the hip pocket strategy. I mean, he can do it. It'll be challenged in court right away. There's no doubt about it. But look, I mean, most of the, at least the constitutional experts, most of them side on the fact that the president can do this. The question is, would it even get through the liberal courts? Because you know it's going to be challenged most likely in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the liberal bastion out there in San Francisco. And so, look, he's going to try to do it, and he can do it. Here's the truth of the matter. You can't imagine Donald Trump in 2020 going to all of these big rallies running for president saying, you know, I tried, but I really couldn't get it done. I'm sorry. That's not going to work. Donald Trump's going to try and figure out how to build this wall. If Congress won't do it, he will definitely go the national emergency route. But, of course, Pat, as you know, the danger with that is a Democrat president comes along and all of a sudden climate change is this national emergency where you have to dip into funds. And it could open up a whole a big, huge Pandora's box.
You know, there's a woman named Ann Coulter. She said once upon a time that I was, quote, the Jim Jeffords of the Republican Party. People like that are just so far on the right hand and yet they're excoriating the president for being the president. He had to open the government. He had to do it. Is he listening to these people on the right, do you think?
Well, I don't think he's listening to Ann Coulter anymore. He unfollowed her on Twitter back in December. Look, Ann Coulter has always been about, wait for it, Ann Coulter. I mean, she says provocative things. And I was on Fox and Friends yesterday morning, and I said she's off her rocker. And you know what? She is off her rocker. I mean, she represents a far-right portion of that 35% base we hear about all the time that Donald Trump has. It's not representative of, for sure, that evangelical army that got him elected. As a matter of fact, I know that from just looking at my Twitter feed and all of the comments coming in. Everybody's saying he didn't cave, he'll figure it out. He hasn't broken promises before. He'll make sure that wall gets done. But look, even if he doesn't get the wall done because it gets held up, let's say, in the courts, they believe, those evangelicals believe that he's fighting as hard as he possibly can. And I think ultimately this could help him politically as we move down the road in 2020.
You know, he has something. He's got a State of the Union. He'll have a platform that he can lay out a host of the things that he's done. Well, what do you think the strong points that he needs to emphasize in the State of the Union?
Well, it'll center on humanitarian assistance. I don't think there's a question about that. That's going to be number one for him. And then after that, look, you go down the line, Pat. I mean, you have to think about some of the things that he's already said in that Oval Office address. But the truth of the matter is it's going to be very, very difficult to change really anybody's minds at this point. Look, I think everybody's dug in. And at this point, I don't think there's much he can do to change anything. I think it's interesting how he's handled Nancy Pelosi in this situation. You know, he says his nickname for Nancy is Nancy. I mean, he doesn't say anything, unlike Crying Chuck and a few other folks. And I think there's a reason for that. I think he respects her. I think he thinks she's a fighter just like him. She's a survivor. And if you notice, Pat, what he does with Nancy Pelosi, it's very, very interesting. A lot of times on Twitter, you always hear him talk about the Republicans and say it's such a thing of beauty how the Republicans stuck together. He respects Nancy Pelosi because think what you might about her. Bottom line is she gets those Democrats to stick together, and he respects that.
One last thing. The acting attorney general has said he thinks the Mueller probe is going to wind down. I've heard that from Jay Sekulow and others. He's about at the end of the line. What do you hear about that?
Right. I think they are at the end of the line here, Pat, and I think that is going to come. It's all going to happen very soon. I think the question now becomes, does that report become public? Now, I think a lot of folks would laugh at that point and say, well, of course it's going to become public. And I think eventually it will. But technically, as you know, Pat, it's not supposed to be. It'll go to the Justice Department and it'll go from there. This thing will be leaked out. The question then just becomes, you know, how much does the White House fight some of this to become public? How much does Congress? It depends what's obviously in it. And so that's a big part of the fight. Also, even if there's no Russian collusion in this report, remember, federal and state prosecutors could have potential cases here when it comes to campaign finance violations. So even if this whole Mueller investigation clears the president of Russian collusion, it doesn't necessarily mean this is over for the president when it comes to federal and state prosecutors dealing with what Michael Cohen said about campaign finance violations.
Well, I think we're all a little tired of hearing about this investigation. Is dragged on forever and ever and ever, but Mueller is sure indicted. What they did, you know, it used to be the big firm was Black, Manafort, and Stone. They were the big political operatives of the right some years ago, and now Manafort is in jail, and they raided Roger Stone, and I guess Charlie Black's the only one that's kind of stayed clear of the fight. What do you think? Don't you think they went all over the top in having those people raid Stone's house in the early morning?
Well, for sure, there's a lot of pushback on that, Pat. And, you know, look, Roger Stone was definitely not any sort of risk to flee the country. If anything, the only thing he would be moving towards is not another country, but another microphone. I mean, he loves the attention. So this idea that the FBI would come in guns a-blazing, if you will, or at least guns at the ready, seemed a bit over the top. But it also does question, I know a lot of folks have said, you know, CNN, it was just good journalism that they were there. Look, I mean, good journalism or not, no one's having necessarily a problem with the fact that, you know, they're working their sources. But it's interesting, who are those sources? sources, because once again we get into this idea that is there, this deep state portion of what people believe, which is that the FBI tipping off liberal CNN and everybody kind of working together to get the beautiful video of Roger Stone and the FBI that morning. So I think that's more the issue that folks are having.
David, thanks for your insights. Come back soon. God bless you.
Anytime. Thank you, Pat.
David Brody. Isn't that interesting?
Fascinating.
A tie between the FBI and CNN. I mean, good grief.
The swamp is deep.
Oh, man, the deep state. The FBI has got to be cleaned up. They're wonderful people. The FBI has been so important, but boy, oh boy, the corruption, the Lisa Page and Roger Strzok and
the list goes on.
It's just horrible. But anyhow, we'll see what happens.